Hi. In Unit 3, the weeks 5 and 6, we're going to be looking more closely at what it is to exegete culture for worship and witness. Now, this has a number of issues to it. Exegeting a culture is a huge topic. It's an area of specialization for many of us, especially those of us who call ourselves ethnomusicologists, because we look at music and culture and how they combine. It helps us to consider, how do we define worship? What's behind that? You noticed in the signal systems, I was talking about the importance of culture bringing meaning into the use and how the function of the systems that are being used. So, how do you define worship? How do you define witness? And for our worship ethnography, which we're working up towards, we can ask the question, how do you define music, and what are the cultural explications of music and culture, of worship and culture, of witness and culture? We need to come up with a number of vocabulary terms. I am drawing heavily on ethnomusicology in this unit. Chapter 3 of my Global Arts and Christian Witness book will cover this in much more detail, but I want to give you just an overview, introduction, some major ideas that will be helpful to you, I pray, throughout the rest of this course and as we interact together. So, becoming bimusical. Because we talk about music cultures as different systems of people and how they interact through music, we as ethnomusicologists, we think it's important to be able to function within two music cultures, our own and whatever new music culture that we go to. So that's one of our goals, and maybe we'll try working on that while we're in Nairobi. Heart music. Heart music is a more popular term, but can take on very special technical meanings. And in essence, what it's saying is, what is the music that resonates most closest to your heart? When you hear it, you feel comfortable, you relax, it ministers to you on a deep level. More, you can appreciate other musics, but they just don't really speak to you in the same way and with such great impact as your own heart music. Music culture, we're going to be talking more about this, is how people get involved with music within their own cultural context. That's a brief definition. An example from Africa, we have different ways of putting these together. Heart music is sometimes called home music. What's your music of home? Blending and syncretic musics. In the early years when we were developing this, we talked about it being town music, where people have moved from the village into, but they're not yet into the city. And so we call that town. And city music, where it's highly multicultural. And it used to be that people often thought, well, when you move to the city, you move into classical music. That was in the 80s. When I first went out to Kenya. When I first went out to Kenya was in 78, and I learned this taxonomy, this way of categorizing music. She said, the specialist, Joyce Scott, said, oh, it's classical music. And I say, no, it's not. It's what it's become is highly multicultural, and we need to be conversant in multiple musics. And global music would imply that there's a fusing of musics, an open recognition of all musics and any kind of music. So let's look more specifically of how to define a music culture. It's a group of people's total involvement in music, their total way of involvement with music and the culture. How do they work with music? What's acceptable? What's not acceptable? And Alan Merriam, the grandfather of American ethnomusicology, said it this way. He says, ultimately, a music culture rests in the people themselves. It's their ideas, their actions, and the sound they produce that becomes their music culture. We could go further into this. I have a course, in fact, Dr. Megan Myers taught it this year, called Exegeting Music Culture. So it's a very big discipline once you know about it and understand it. Now for us, we can take and say, what's the worship culture of a church? What's the witness culture? How do the cultural elements impact worship and witness? And what does that mean for doing global worship and witness? When we talk about a music culture, however, we want to consider and take into account that peoples in various music cultures patterns sound differently. And we're going to be experiencing that. You'll read of many examples. Rhythm, melody, meter, and harmony form are ways of describing patterns of structure. The most obvious one that you're going to experience quite a bit in Nairobi would be organizing a song around the call and response pattern. The Lord bless you, the Lord bless you. That's a simple imitation, a simple call and response to become more complex. The Lord bless you, the Lord bless you, and keep you, and keep you. So you can get this back and forth and interacting together. There's some very complex forms of it, as opposed to the hymning. The structure of a 19th century hymn where you have 4 verses and you always sing the same chorus in between each verse. Those are contrasting forms that differ from culture to culture, and each culture will specialize in particular types of forms. But wait a minute, there is more. Let's take a look. It's important to recognize that for us as outsiders traveling to Kenya or wherever we might be called to do ministry, it might be in the inner city when we're from the suburbs, or it might be going out to rural America and being among farmers, learning to hear a strange music from the viewpoint of the people who make that music enlarges our understanding and increases our pleasure. So I want us, and I thrive on doing this, learning to appreciate music from the viewpoint of the people so that we can go deeper in understanding them and in enjoying the music. I often say the course I teach when I teach exegeting music culture is I raise the question, what do we learn about a people through their music, and what does that mean for worship and witness? And we want to keep that in mind as we work through the readings for this course, and then as we meet together in Nairobi, both during the pre-conference time and at the conference. So let's consider together how this has implications for the Missio Dei, God's mission. What does it mean to move into another people's cultures? One of the things that I enjoy and have experienced here in the States, and I've seen it in a number of settings, is more informal, is what is called the electric slide. What do you see going on here? Whose tradition is this? Is it limited just to people of that tradition? I've seen people in Pasadena at summer concert events just get out and dance it all together. A lot of kinesic signal systems going on there. Look at the colors. All those colors are significant. We can bring many things together. The singing, there's a solo and a response related to the call and response form that I talked about. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that we need to be able to look and identify what's going on. And with the signal systems, that helps us. And then we want to look at some principles that are there. And we find that music functions on a local, global continuum, where it's very context, limited, specific, locally, and it grows out. Local can become global. And that's what we've seen happen in multiple ways. It's the electric slide can be found all over the world, probably. The ukulele, which became so important to Hawaii, that has spread all over the world. But often, the local music means the most to the people who have grown up with it and for whom it is their heart language or heart music. So, local is emphasized, and we see and read from Jeff Todd Titan, leading ethnomusicologist. He says music cultures should not be understood as isolated and untouched, but rather as ways of life that resist homogenization. So there's a number of principles going on here. And what Titan is saying, he's saying that they don't happen alone or in isolation. We influence one another, we choose what we like, but and more importantly to me is they are ways of life, ways of living life via the music system. What did I tell you about the electric slide? Oh, I remember doing it at a summer concert event where you're picnic and then you get up and they play the music and you all dance together. So there's a forming of community. That's totally different from going to sing classical choral works in the Los Angeles Cathedral, for example, or going to a village dance in Africa, in rural Africa, or going to the Carnivore restaurant where they're doing a lot of jazz and Western type style dancing, but they're still doing it differently. So you see, as a broad way, how do we live life through the music systems that we have? And I will always say, what are the implications for mission? So, in general, just look at these four circles. We have music at the center, and we're looking at music as performance. We have music at the center. We have performers who are making it happen. We have the audience who is receiving it. I think the audience is a poor term. We have the participants, really. And then we have the space that is used and how much time, how long does it last. A classical concert is an hour and a half to 2 hours, whereas a Christmas celebration in West Africa among the Senefo where I worked would go all night long, and there would be singing and dancing and feasting, and oh my, it was a glorious event. Well, 3 years ago when I went to GCOM, it was held in Chiang Mai, Thailand, and on my way home, I stopped to see one of my doctoral students who was working in Istanbul, Turkey. And this is the place where the water comes together. You actually have a divide between the continents, and where people say east meets west. So let's take a look around. What kind of a music culture did I just begin to experience? Once we get into this concept of observing and being aware of things that we can look for, it becomes fascinating. I love this picture, by the way. It was on the wall of the metro. Beautiful metro system in Istanbul with beautiful, gorgeous art on it. Shows the value of the arts in Istanbul, Turkey. And what did I see? Well, I went out and I visited the Hagia Sophia Mosque, very famous mosque you see in the background there, and I'm in the foreground on the left. And then we went, this is the country where the very famous poet Rumi comes from, and Rumi is the most celebrated poet in the United States, most popular, and the whirling dervishes, who are Sufi Muslims who are seeking to commune with God as they dance and lift their arms up and they twirl. They're often called the twirling dervishes. Well, outside of that, where that event was taking place, where you have to pay and go and be a tourist to see them, it's really a religious brotherhood. They only show you part of their event. They show you the famous parts of what's become famous. We were out on the streets, we were moving around, and what did we come across? Here is a local bagpipe player on the left, and two little boys are looking, they're fascinated, and the one in front is trying to get up the nerve to touch this bagpipe, which is obviously freshly made from the inside of a local animal. You move to the right, and there in the metro, what you see is another bagpipe player. And it's important, music is so important in Istanbul and to the Turkish culture. They go to the effort of painting on the metro walls beautiful designs and beautiful pictures where to indicate musicians can play here and you can donate to them. They do their busking there. Well, we were on the streets, we're going through the metro, and in one of the metro stops you have to go underground to go beneath the water to get to the other side. And so you have a lot of shops underneath and in the metro. And what did we stumble across? We stumbled across a group of Kurdish young men. Now, the Kurds are not liked in Istanbul, but they're still quite common. And we have, oh dear, what happened to my, here we go. And so there we were walking, and this group of young men starts dancing. Notice how people start joining in. Notice it's a line dance. There's tactile, there's touching. Look at the use of space. It's just in a public area. Where they happen to be. They didn't have a special room. There's trills going on, not just singing. There's a local instrument being played. They finally get it together. They're moving in sync. So there's all sorts of questions that we can ask about what was happening there in Istanbul. So what we do with a music culture model is we move from a live music event to cultural analysis. And that's we're gonna follow the same principle when we do our worship ethnographies in Nairobi on the Sunday that we're there. So Titan tells us meaningfully organized sound. Oh, this is his definition of music. Think about it. Music is meaningful, organized sound that proceeds by rules. And each music culture has their own rules. The way you dance, what kind of tone quality is acceptable. Do you include trills and whistles when you're singing? All of those are grounded on rules that are appropriate for a particular music culture. And what we're going to be doing as we do our worship ethnographies, we're doing participant observation, and the task of fieldwork and analysis then is to discover the rules governing ideas about music, worship, and witness, and behavior in relation to music, as well as the links between these rules or principles and the sound that a group of people calls music. So we're trying to understand it by doing participant observations, by talking with people, by interviewing worship leaders, by interviewing musicians, and trying to get a grasp of how meaningful it is for them and what it indicates and implies for us as leaders in worship, seeking to understand how people engage with God and how they can meet God in worship, in music as witness, global music, reaching out for witness. So, in essence, I've given you a very brief overview of exegeting a musical culture. Let's do just a mini review as we close up here. Music ethnography focuses on a musical situation that you seek out directly from people. It's done at live events. You can always substitute a people's worship culture rather than music culture. It's the same thing. That's what we're going to be doing when we're in Nairobi. Participant observation is one of the methods. And participant observation means we do in-person witnessing, excuse me, observing, questioning, tape recording, photographing, and sometimes performing, entering in, becoming bi-musical, and as we enter into the occasion, we are building relationship, which I consider very, very important in relating with God's people and in relating with people to share God's love. So, as we do this, we're going to be collecting, understanding, and organizing information about music in worship. And we're going to try to understand the musical situation from a web of information that we gather together as we do our ethnography. Ultimately, we work at describing and interpreting it, and that's your final signature assignment. No, not your signature assignment. It's your Worship in the City ethnography assignment, and you'll be writing that up. So there are 3 methods to review. There are 3 methods for doing ethnography: participant observation, interviews, and archival materials. Do people hand out a bulletin? Church bulletins used to be quite a resource. Are audio cassettes available? Are CDs available? Or MP3, MP4s available? All of that builds into and contributes to doing exegesis of a music culture and of worship and witness. What is ethnography? It literally means the description of a people. So in one sense, an ethnography is a narrative account of a people and their way of life. The word ethnography also refers to a process, the means by which a researcher collects and interprets information. So don't fear the word ethnography. It's just a matter of learning how to systematically observe, participate, interview, and then write up a description. And in a sense, it's storytelling of what is going on, reflecting deeply about it. Well, this is important. It's important for our approach to doing missions and doing both worship and witness. The missional context is the world. This is a missiological framework that we have, and it's in the world that we do our exegesis of music cultures and of worship. We always are grounded in the biblical word. This impacts who we are, the relational dimension. We begin to interact with people. We're interacting with God. We're building relationship with God. We're also building relationship with people in their own local context, so that ultimately we can come together and fellowship as the community of faith, the church. I hope you find this helpful, and you have this now to review and help you just do some vocabulary learning, and we'll talk further about it. Again, keep Christ at the center of it all, and may the Lord bless you. Thanks.